I begin this talk by acknowledging the traditional custodians of these unceded lands, the Dja Dja Wurrung peoples. I pay my deepest respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people here today. Now, in the department, well, I'll let you in on a little personal secret. I do a lot of public speaking, but one of the great fears I have is of boring people. So I manage that by writing my own talks or preparing them. But then in the job I have, I lack time, so other people prepare things for me. And sometimes you get a catalogue, which has very valuable information in it, but doesn't quell my fear of boring people. So I'm not going to give you the catalogue today, but if you want it, because it does have some very valuable information in it, you can always email me and I'll send you the talk. But I'll just start off by saying the talk does start off by talking about what the Royal Commission said about the mental health and wellbeing of people in regional and rural Victoria, and it's not very good, as you all know. And so the Commission did respond by a few recommendations that were specific to rural and regional Victoria. One was about providing incentives for the mental health and wellbeing workforce in rural and regional areas, and the government has invested $13.7 million into that over 4 years. Another recommendation was supporting the mental health and wellbeing of people in rural and regional Victoria, and providing funding to acknowledge the higher cost of providing services in these areas, and a couple of digital projects. And then another recommendation was the regional boards. There are now going to be 8 regional boards in Victoria, and I think 4 or 5 of those are outside metropolitan Melbourne. And the interim regional boards are happening at the moment, and the interesting thing about these boards is that they have to have people with lived and living experience on them. Now, they got going last year, and through no fault of their own, they haven't yet had a high profile in their regions, but their key role is to build trusted relationships with communities and stakeholders, including service providers, and they've been set up to bring a strong understanding of local communities to inform their advice to the department. Now, at the end of 2024, the permanent boards are going to be set up, and they will be advising the Minister for Mental Health on a range of matters related to mental health in their region. There's been a whole bunch of government investment into mental health services and also into rural and remote services. I've got a list of about 12 investments here. Again, if you're really interested, I can send you that list. So I'm the Executive Director for Lived Experience in the Victorian Department of Health. And I'll tell you a little bit about my backstory and how I ended up here. So when I was a young woman, at about the age of 18, I began to experience severe distress through mood swings, and ended up in the mental health system, as one does. And I was in and out of hospitals for, about 7 or 8 years. It took a huge chunk out of my 20s, and my life was actually a bit of a train wreck. And the experiences I had didn't just impact on, what was going on in my head. They impacted my relationships, my education, my ability to work, my sense of self, and the development milestones that one usually makes at that time of life, which are quite significant. Unfortunately, the way society and services responded didn't help that train wreck. In fact, they probably accelerated it to some degree. And I was told at the age of 21 that by a doctor, psychiatrist, who said to me, "Mary, come and sit down, I've got something to tell you. You have a severe mental illness. You will experience this for the rest of your life. You will need to take medication for the rest of your life. You will have to, you won't be able to have a career like you thought you were going to, because you will continue to have episodes. And you better think very carefully about having children in case you pass your shonky genes on to them." Now, look, the great gift I had, of course, was not to believe him. I do feel for people, and I was a bit of a rebel, so that helped in that circumstance. Now, one of the great joys of my life has been proving that doctor wrong, and I managed to get out of that part of my life. And since I was about 30, I haven't really had any mental distress. I've had children. They've got no sign of mental health problems, and I've worked with hardly a day off for the last 35 plus years. So I feel very good about proving that doctor wrong. But I think what that experience taught me was that the clinically dominated institutional system does not work for people. Now, I'm not saying that there's I think clinicians have something to offer. I think very occasionally hospital care might have something to offer. But we have these services in bucket loads, and we have very little of anything else. And I'm so grateful to the community health services for providing some of that something else with the crumbs that you have compared to the clinical system. So, I just want to talk a little bit about the reforms. Some stakeholders we've been picking up are pretty disappointed in the reforms, especially the people with lived experience. And, people are frustrated at the department. And look, I've been on the outside of the bureaucracy a lot of my working life, looking in, feeling frustration, and so I understand. The department is full of dedicated people, and we're trying to turn around a 167-year legacy of clinically dominated and hospital-centric mental health services. Now, since the asylum era, institutional mental health services, I believe, have done a lot of harm and produced very poor health and life outcomes. And I survived those sorts of services despite them, not because of them. The Victorian mental health bureaucracy was first known as the Hospitals for the Insane branch. Then it was the Lunacy Department. That was up until 1934. It's extraordinary they were still talking about lunatics in 1934. Then it became the Department of Mental Hygiene. Then from 1962 there were various mental health authorities, branches, and now a division with a new word entering the lexicon, Wellbeing. I hope that word has some weight for the future. And for all these 167 years, virtually all the state funding has gone to hospitals. Even in the post-deinstitutionalised era period in the 1990s, before it was removed for NDIS, only 10% of the state budget went to community mental health services. And coming from New Zealand, that's pretty low. In New Zealand, it's about 30%. And I don't think that's high enough either. So now, look, through the reforms, it's like we're turning around a tanker in a canal. And that canal is one of historical precedent and convention. conventional thinking and conventional ways of doing things. And, I've heard some people argue that the reforms don't go far enough because they are adding to the hospital-based system without reducing it. So they're sort of additive without any subtractive elements to it. These are pretty testing times, whether you're in the department or working in the wider sector. The reform agenda is huge and will take more than a decade to be realised. People come to me and say, well, we're not seeing any difference. And that's true for a lot of people. And people probably won't see the promise of the reforms for quite some time to come. However, despite the current budgetary constraints, and you've probably heard a lot about them, we certainly have, the government remains fully committed to the implementation of the Royal Commission recommendations. It may take a bit longer than initially expected. So I'm the Executive Director of the Lived Experience branch in the Department of Health. There are 25 FTEs in our branch. There's no equivalent lived experience presence in the bureaucracy of any other jurisdiction in the world that I know of. So this is pretty unique, what we've got in Victoria. I actually believe the reforms offer great hope to the genuine embedding of lived experience partnerships, leadership and workforce across Victoria going into the future. We see it happening in the leadership and governance of the new entities, including the Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission, the regional boards and the Victorian Collaborative Centre for Mental Health. We see it in the lived experience executive roles being created in many services, and we see it happening in the doubling of the lived experience workforce over the last several years, and it'll continue to double over the next several years. So the embedding of lived experience, in my view, has the potential to do what new investment and new services cannot do on their own. And that is change the culture to one that embraces multiple approaches, multiple worldviews, and deeply respects the people who come for help. However, I think the gains in lived experience, leadership and workforce are fragile. Yes, we need to celebrate the progress we have made, but we also need to protect those gains from being eroded by the forces of the status quo. Now, I just want to finish. I'm doing a quick talk today, so that'll be of some comfort to the organisers. So finally, I've visited several community health services because I do like to get out of Lonsdale Street. And because I'm new to Victoria, I thought I'd better go out and say hello to a bunch of people. So I've visited Ballarat Community Health, Gateway Health, La Trobe Community Health, as well as Better Health Network and Co-Health in Melbourne. And you know what? I've been really impressed by how well connected community health services are to your communities, to the breadth of services you offer and your commitment to lived experience. Now, it takes quite a lot to impress me, so please take this as a genuine compliment. And just keep up the good work in these challenging and exciting times. Thank you very much.